It's time. All right. A fateful night in 2011.
11.
We met in the Boston Metro, and we dated for a couple months before she moved back to France. While in France this past winter, she developed a keen interest in Drupal development. So, using LogMeIn, which allows you to get to the other person's computer, so I was able to get into her computer, help her out sometimes, and give her lessons in Drupal. I was able to teach her to be a Drupal developer, where now she has some customers of her own.
And so I was learning from France.
Right.
And we had to overcome the time change. So sometimes I was learning Drupal in the middle of the night. But it was good.
Uh-huh. So we had that pretty big extra hurdle of teaching virtually and with a huge time difference. But it'll help a lot, if you're teaching somebody in the office, for example, or your friend, just for having them next to you and you could just interact with them. It makes it a lot easier. When she got here, we were able to make some big gains as well. But for most of the time, it was virtual. What we'll be covering today is really kind of the timeline of how she learned to be a Drupal developer, what are the key topics to learn, and things like that.
Yeah. But also, the person you are teaching Drupal has to be passionate and also very dedicated and perseverant, because sometimes you face trouble and bugs.
Mm-hmm. So. Yeah, the original title for this was How to Teach Your Girlfriend Drupal Development in 7 Months. Which kind of implies that you have some degree of closeness and you spend a lot of time together. So yeah, passionate, dedicated are key qualities as well for somebody you're teaching. What we're teaching today as well is going from a non-technical to a developer role. Not from going from a technical to a really good Drupal role. So somebody at the Drupal, the Nova Drupal meetup, we met the other day, who now works at Acquia. In 9 months, he went from not touching Drupal to being working at Acquia and doing some amazing things. So I think the timeline is pretty much twice as fast or 3 times as fast if you're coming from another development environment. Yeah.
So the first month is a discovery. And you student has to register first on Drupal.org. It's the main thing to do. Also, Drupal.org/planet is both our homepage. You get all the news, all the cool modules that just have been released. You get
a newsfeed of all the best blogs online.
Exactly.
Right.
Yes. So it's very good to start. Also, there are some free podcasts for Drupalize.me. So it's released every other week, and it's very good to learn.
And one quick note, we had more people than last year. I presented last year, and it's like a feast or famine here. So I printed out 30 pages of summary, and I handed it out to 30 people. This is also available. I'll give you the link at the last slide on my website, and the PowerPoint is also on that same page. So, but it's anthony-glynn.com/Drupal7 months. So, just so you know, that'll come at the end. As far as Drupal.org/security, every Wednesday there's security releases that come out. The Drupal security team is quite good. There's about a dozen and a half professionals who keep up, and how it works, a little background with Drupal security, is that someone notices a vulnerability in a module, contributed module. They contact the security team. The security team works with that person and the module maintainer in order to get a patch ready. And then when it's ready, they announce that, okay, there's a vulnerability and here's the upgrade you need to take.
And so your students should also take part in meetups. There are many meetups about Drupal. So it's very good to learn. You meet people. It's a very friendly atmosphere. You can ask your question. you learn from other developers, so we can only advise to go to those meetups.
Yeah, this brings up like everyone has a slightly different like learning preference. So I learned mainly by reading pro Drupal development and going to meetups. And the main key there was I get to see what the realm of possibility was with Drupal development. And I got inspired constantly, and I got my questions answered. I noticed people are a lot friendlier in person at Drupal meetups, like very friendly. But online, almost like half the time I bumped into somebody kind of rude. So I just kept asking my questions in person. And then the DrupalCon events is really an extension of that, and you're here now, so I guess you understand that point. The key first step is to get your local development environment set up. So these signs, Linux, Git, Drush, PHPMyAdmin, and Firebug are some of the key ones. I'll go through each. Linux is an operating system that has some of the strongest tools related to development in any software. And if you have a Windows computer, then you could use something like VirtualBox. That's how I set up her computer, which is a free open source VM application that you could just have on your computer, and you can install as many sub-computers or VMs as you want. So we just clicked on Linux. Now she has a Linux environment. She develops on that.
And also at the very beginning, I was developing on a Windows computer, and it was much harder than developing on a Linux computer.
And
we can see a difference.
Yeah. One key part of why it's so much easier is partially because Drush plays such a key role in Drupal development. Drush is the command line tools that you're given. And with Windows, I noticed a lot of issues and limitations. And I guess I am used to developing on Linux, so a lot of hindrances there. But with Linux, you're free to go, do what you want. With Git, that's a source control tool that is used throughout the Drupal community. It's used in order to push modules and things like that. And if you want to get some stuff before it's even published, like Drupal core, you would need like a Git account on Drupal. The way you sign up for your Git account on Drupal as well as security is you just log into your account and you can click on newsletters to get the security releases, which we talked about the last slide. Or for your Git account, you could click on, I think it's just Git.
And also, maybe your students may be scared of the command line, but I think personally it is fun. So you should really show him how fun it could be, and also how faster you can go with this.
Yeah, so this presentation is about teaching Drupal in 7 months. A lot of you may be learning it, but if you're teaching it, you also need to have a lot of patience, because I think most people think of the timeline that I showed in the second slide of a technical person moving on to Drupal, which is very quick. But with the non-technical person, there's a lot of foundational development stuff, not just like Drupal development, but related to all development, that don't really have parallels in the non-development sphere, such as Git. Like, that was one of the hardest things to teach and learn personally. There are some GUI tools through graphical user interface that you could just kind of pull and merge and things like that for Git. I personally taught her doing the hard command line way so that she can understand the basics. And PHPMyAdmin I'll just blow through. It has to do with the MySQL database. Without a GUI, it's really difficult to learn what a database is, but it's really just tables with similar values that can connect up values. And then Firebug is like most browsers nowadays have development tools, and for Firefox, Firebug has been out for years and it's very good. But if you download pretty much any browser nowadays, you could just click on, okay, I want to see the developer toolbar, and then boom, you get pretty much the same functionality. So if you have Chrome, even IE has an okay one now, so. Yeah.
And so, of course, one of the main steps is to install your first Drupal site. So you may want your students having a distribution profile, such as Commons or Drupal Commerce or Open Public, because then you already have the modules installed, you already have some functionalities on your site, so it may make things easier.
Unfortunately, I forgot something at the beginning of the presentation. I forgot to introduce us. My name is Anthony Glynn. This is Emily and Glenn. We just got married a month ago. So this, so the stuff we're teaching you isn't so bad that it cause a breakup or anything. So so it's okay. I work at Blackstone Technology Group. We have some contracts with DHS and USDA. We've built Drupal sites, Java. I'm currently on a Fresco site for the SNAP program, which was called food stamps. So that's pretty exciting. We've also done business intelligence and things like that. So if you are interested, let me know. Emmeline is now a Drupal developer.
So I built a website for one of my family members. She's a painter, so I really wanted to make her paintings more well-known. And right now I am building a website for a comedy show and musician show producer. So I'm very happy about it.
Yeah, so it's called Capital City Showcase. It's really good. So
Yes.
you
Not now.
Okay, so in order to actually understand what Drupal is, you install your first site, right? But if you've installed it, Drupal core, it's like you don't even know where to go from that point. So at least in getting started, using a distribution profile is really good. The most popularly used and best ones are Commerce, Drupal Commerce, Open Public, and Drupal Commons. Each of those have a particular use case. So Drupal Commons is if you want to manage communities. Open Public is for government sites, so I guess a lot of you would be using that. I used it on a couple of large sites. And then Drupal Commerce is obviously for selling things online, so that's very good as well. That has a little bit more of a learning curve, but regardless of which installation profile you use, at least you could see a beautiful site right off the bat and you could explore what the best practices are. They're in place. So like the modules are installed and configured. You can kind of see, okay, this is kind of how it works.
And so, especially which is important is to play. Once you have your first Drupal site installed, you move around, you may edit some content, and so on. So then, as you move forwards, you are going to get the skills. So what you may want to do is explain some basic terms, Drupal terms, to your students. For example, I was really lost with the term API, and we see a lot this term, API. And I tried to find the definition online, and I did not find a simple one. So when Anthony told me it is the functions available in Drupal, I was, okay, this is much more simpler now. But there are other words you may want to explain, such as node, which is basically a piece of content. Module, but module, you obviously know what it is.
So yeah,
Content
API,
type.
the Drupal.org, I think /API or API.Drupal.org is your best friend here as far as like finding out different functions and how things work.
So also it's good to tell your students about very helpful module because it's a great help when you develop websites. So administration menu, I don't know if people already know this module, but it's a very, very good one. It allows you to hover on Drupal menu items and you then the menu items inside this menu display under, and so you can just go quickly on the page you want.
Right, so the reason we're mentioning admin menu and coffee and module filter is because when you're starting out on the Drupal site, regardless of whether you use a distribution profile, you can get lost. And Drupal core doesn't really help too much in finding your way around at first. You could bookmark pages and things, but other than that, it's kind of, you still need to kind of click, see the page, click, see the page. You could easily get lost or get frustrated because the back end is pretty slow with Drupal. So with admin menu, you're hovering over and you can drill to the page you want. And coffee, which I never used but you were using, and it sounds amazing, is where you type in the page that you want to go to. A link pops up and you click on it and you go right to the page you want, such as create article, boom, a link comes up, click it, you're creating an article.
And so module filter allows your module page to look clearer, and so the module page can be overwhelming because you download so many modules. And with this, you can search and find the right module quicker.
And it categorizes all of them. Develop module is for a little bit later in the learning process, but it's a key helper module as well. In order to be a Drupal developer, you need to be programming and dealing with variables, and Develop allows you to access those variables in the system. For theming, it's really critical. I think Develop Themer is either part of it or in a separate one, but they work together pretty well. Structurally, every site you deal with, or I've dealt with, has 2 or more of these Drupal modules. Features is kind of similar to Get in the sense that it's storing configuration. Git is storing your code. Features is a module in the system where you could export your configuration. Drupal, if you're not as familiar, it stores both in Drupal 7 and below its configuration and its content in the database. And it's not, you have to use something like features in order to extract, okay, this is how I'm setting up this page and this page or this setup. So that's pretty key. Panels and context both put you down a certain path as far as how you're going to architect the site as well. So context says, okay, if these things occur, so if you're on this page or if you're on this content type, then show this region, this block, or this thing or that thing, or do this. Panels is kind of a different route where you're using a GUI and you're constructing pages. That's what Emmeline got into. I'm more of the context school of thought. And then we have views, which is pretty much on every site you use.
So also, either you would like your student to learn more about theming, so then you may want him to download a theme such as Zen, Omega, or Adaptive Theme, because these themes are pretty white, like plain. So then your student will have to do some theming, learn some CSS. But if you want your students to learn more about site building, then you may want to use a theme that looks more reddish. So that depends. Also, you should tell him about subtheme, because you may not know at the beginning that you need a subtheme. It happens.
Who knows what a subtheme is? Okay.
Everyone.
All right, so again, people learn in different ways. I learned by reading Pro Drupal Development and going to meetups primarily. And I saw a couple videos on Lullabot, now called Drupalize Me. But Emmeline preferred to learn with videos, so that's... you're right. And so we bought a subscription to buildamodule.com and Drupalize.me, which pretty much answers all your questions. There's over 1,000 videos on buildamodule.com. The guy is really nice. Like, I met him once or twice, and he's really smart. It also has some PHP videos. And in order to be a Drupal developer, you need to actually know PHP. So it actually gives you an okay introduction to that.
And so buildamodule.com is for both a very beginner Drupal developer, but also for more intermediate Drupal developer. So it's very, very useful if you begin. And as the title says, like it's to train you to then build your own custom module.
Yeah, building modules is a litmus test, I think, for interviewers, at least myself, to know if you're Drupal developer material. So that's kind of a key goal to have, is to build your own custom modules as soon as you can, and then just refine it.
So otherwise, I never used this one, not one library, but it's free, and people say it's very good. But there's no videos related to coding. It's only tutorials about using the UI.
Drupalize.me is a little pricier, but deals with all levels of Drupal development. It's like, well, I looked online, I think it's $420 per year, $420 for the subscription for a year. And Build a Module is like a little more affordable at $270 or something like that. Both are very good, and you subscribe to both, and I think it was pretty critical to answering your questions, because the timeline that we were dealing with was for the first month, because she didn't know the Drupal landscape. I had to spend essentially 50% of her time was learning directly from me, walking through lessons and me answering questions. And then the other 50% of her time was on these video sites. Then she was able to more and more build her own websites on her computer, watch more videos on our own to understand the context and just kind of drill down deeper into each of the areas of development within Drupal.
And also, there are videos on YouTube. Some are poor quality, but some of them are really good, and they're free. So it's another way.
So I mentioned Pro Drupal development. I thought the 7 version was a little less good than the 6 version. It didn't include some critical topics such as entities, so I thought that was a pretty big oversight. But the definitive guide to Drupal 7 I heard was very, very good. It's about this thick, so you could build a house with it if you have enough of them. And it really does seem like it covers all the important topics, so I've heard good things. I would recommend that. One topic that really isn't discussed very much in the Drupal community, I feel, is debugging. The idea that you're going to come across bugs and spend about 30% of your time, maybe 50%, I don't know, on dealing with bugs. In the Drupal community, people are releasing all these new features and modules and themes very quickly and are pretty good in keeping up with the times. But because they're released so quickly, it's kind of an ongoing refinement process where you're dealing with bugs. You're submitting patches as a community member, and they're including it and testing it out. So there are certain. If you're a more advanced developer and you're training somebody, then I would highly recommend that any kind of debugging tools or ideas you have, you really communicate that very well, almost as a key learning point. And what was I going to say?
Clear the cache.
So.
Do you use a debugger or an IDE locally?
I just use Eclipse. I don't use the kind of, okay, run this and it just goes through point by point, like stop at the breakpoints or things like that. I haven't. I guess the thing that I was thinking of is most useful, even though it's a little less scientific, is just like getting the person very familiar with the logs, and they can kind of take over from there in order to see what the errors are in the Apache logs and the Drupal watchdog logs, and then they could just Google their way to an answer. So.
Yeah. So also you should make your student feel adventurous. So your student is supposed to do a backup of his database, and his code is on a Git repository. So even if he is doing a mistake, because it happens, then nothing is irreversible, like he can still go back. So regarding that, the student should just try new stuff out, just feel adventurous, because this is by doing that we are learning.
Right. Okay, yeah, I think that's a very good point. So if you get somebody right off the bat with a decent understanding of Git and backup and migrate, and it's like you schedule some backups on their computer and they're backing up constantly, then they're able to kind of just try all the things out that you're asking them rather than kind of slowly moving along and worrying that they're going to mess something up. I think that worry could slow somebody down. Learning PHP is Codecademy.com is really good for learning all kinds of languages, including PHP. It's like very interactive and it's free, so it's great. The hook system is the basis for developing in Drupal, so that's a key topic to cover. And you want to look in some of the bigger modules available in on the contributed system. So views or some of the smaller ones that you use, just go in your system and explore it to see how the architecture works, like how everything's structured. As you may know, all you need is an info file and a module file, so start small and build up.
So also a great way to learn is by trying to help other developers on forums. Because by helping the other, you learn too. And also when you are more advanced, you can help in projects and write some patches. And write your own blog is also a great thing. And give some advice to people is a great way to learn.
I think I discussed this. The litmus test is writing your own custom module, so you always want to keep that in the back of your mind, that that's kind of the goal for this whole experience, is that if you want to become a Drupal developer, in order to create functionality, you need to be creating modules constantly. So we borrowed a couple of images and ideas from these wonderful people and sites, so we're going to thank them. And in order to keep in touch, here's our contact information. We now have time for questions, or we could... Does anyone have questions? Okay.
And when you say that you learned this in 7 months, you mean that you learned it full time, like you do nothing else, just learn this?
I was especially doing this. I had another job, but it was part-time. So
And we
I
dealt
was...
with visa requirements, which takes a lot of time too.
Yes.
So,
I was
yes
filling a
and
lot
no.
of papers. So, yes.
So about how many
So-
hours do you spend on learning this a day?
I would say maybe 4 or 5 hours a day. And some days I did not have time to do anything, so...
Yeah.
But, yes.
So-
A days of working maybe 4 or 5 hours. Yes.
Okay, so a key point also is that both of Emily and I went from non-technical to technical with the Drupal platform. Like, I learned Drupal before I learned business intelligence and Alfresco. And for me, it took like a year and a half to learn this in my spare time. So there's another potential timeline if you're doing this kind of in your spare time. Or if you're in a company and you're in one spot and you want to move more technical, and you're doing it in your spare time, that might be an okay timeline as well. But there's a lot more resources every year in Drupal, so I think it might quicken the learning process.
What are some of the most common pitfalls that you encounter?
I'd say the pitfalls, so some of the hurdles.
Oh.
I'd say Git was something that took a little while. You kind of forget, like, as a developer, if you've been doing it for a few years, you forget what's so hard. And so I think a pitfall is that my assumption was that what I consider easy, like, it would respectively take her, that much time to figure out, oh, if this is an easy topic, it'd be quick. But essentially, after a few years of dealing with Git and command line, it's like super easy for me. But I think I needed to have more patience in kind of like budgeting time for those topics early on.
But also for me, which was hard, is facing bugs. At the beginning, I really was not comfortable with bugs, and I was lost and kind of frustrating. But the more you get with bugs, then the more better you become. So, yes.
The meetups that you mentioned, are they in this area or
The what?
the meetups?
Yeah, so we've got 3 pretty cool meetups around here. So the DC one is typically at Stetson's. I think the next one is in like 2 weeks, and I think it's on Tuesdays. The
Mondays.
Mondays.
Second Monday of the
Second
month usually.
Monday. Okay, great. Yeah, so I used to go to that all the time. Now I checked out the Nova one, which is good, Northern Virginia. It's off of the Vienna. It was at the Vienna station recently, but I think it changes locations around Nova, Northern Virginia, and that's very good too. The one in Maryland, there's one in Columbia, and I think there may even be one occasionally in Baltimore.
There is one in Baltimore.
Okay, great.
But basically meetup.com, search for Drupal.
Yes, meetup.com.
How about in France? Do you have meetups in France?
Unfortunately, we don't.
You do.
We don't.
You didn't have any in your area.
Oh, yes. Okay, so we have meetups, but it's in a very big city, and I do not come from a big city, so I could not go. It was too far, very far, actually.
Hi, I wanted to know, you were talking about like the developer background you need. So I heard you say PHP and Git, and what else are some other languages or things you need?
Yeah, so the LAMP stack is, or MAMP or whatever you're using, so Linux, Apache, MySQL, and PHP. I mean, those are the fundamentals. We talked about a number of them today.
HTML,
HTML,
CSS.
So HTML is what's like rendered on the front end, right? So when you look at a page, I guess getting familiar with that. So that
JavaScript.
goes hand in hand with PHP. JavaScript is, there's more and more amazing libraries in JavaScript, and I think that'll play a bigger role in development moving forward. So like knowing the actual fundamentals. There's a really good book called JavaScript: The Good Parts, and that's pretty short. So Yeah, because like PHP, there's a lot of bad parts of it.
Someone was asking about debugging tools, and something I personally like to do when I'm trying to solve a problem is use debug backtrace. And while it's a particularly daunting function in PHP, it does let you look through the stack and see what functions have executed. Like if you're implementing a hook or something, you're like, there's somewhere in the core that you're trying to find some bug.
Yeah.
I find debug backtrace.
That sounds amazing because a lot of the errors that come out always tell you, oh, there's a problem with like the node module or Drupal core, and you're like, there's no problem with Drupal core. It's something down the line, and you're not telling me. So that sounds so backtrace.
Yeah, it's a PHP function, debug _ backtrace.
Okay. Anybody else?
Say that again.
It's called PHP
It's a PHP
debug.
data function, debug _ backtrace.
debug _ backtrace. It's a PHP function.
Your favorite HTML editor, the one that you use, or other tools that you use?
Well, you don't typically have to edit the HTML so much, but with a browser toolbar such as Firebug or just built-in one for Chrome, you just you can inspect and you could change elements on the page to see how it looks. So you just like, oh, I want to change this element and that element. I remember when I was volunteering for a nonprofit around here, and I just pulled up the debugger and I started like editing their page. Like, oh, is that live? No, but it's how you kind of like flesh things out before moving into like your CSS or whatever. So I guess hopefully that answers your question.
PHP editors?
PHP editors, I use Eclipse. It's a little bit heavy and can be slow. Does anyone have recommendations for PHP editors?
PHP Storm.
PHP Storm for good things.
A little longer than Eclipse.
Sublime text.
Only an I.
Sounds good. Yeah.
A good way to explain the difference between panels and splays
Close the session.
Panels, I mean, I think of panels as being very gooey. Like, if you can master, like, this subsystem of panels, of placing things on the page, and placing things within those things and those things, then you could architect your whole site. Like, you want this region here and this and that. And context, for me, was a little simpler because you just say kind of like rules. You say, if these things occur, then have this reaction. So that's as good as I can get it, I think.
Yes.
The difference. And Display Suite, I've only used occasionally, but
I use
don't know.
panels.
Okay.
Yeah.
Are there performance issues with panels?
I've heard occasionally that for larger sites it could slow things down, but I've also heard that it enables your users to get things done on your site, like new layouts for this or that or whatever. So that's a decent trade-off. Any other questions? Okay, well, if you have any more and you're too shy to ask, then come to us afterwards or catch us later. So, thanks for coming.
Yeah.